Hi everyone, I'm Esther and welcome back to Parenting Insight. Now, why do young children have a hard time understanding lateness, and why does your little one or do your little ones have a hard time cooperating when you, for example, let them know that you're late for school or late in getting somewhere? Now, here's a little bit of a developmental perspective in trying to understand why children behave the way they do. Now, for someone to understand the concept of lateness, you would have to understand the concept of time. And for you to understand numbers, basically, you have to understand quantity, you have to understand distance, and in a way, you also have to understand the concept of length. So, for example, 10 is more than 2, and 1920 is earlier than 1940. So if someone was born in 1920, they are 20 years older, they've been there 20 years longer, so the concept of length in a way, than the person who was born in 1940. And there's also the concept of space, so space is more like, for example, to explain distance. So if you're talking, I think, to explain distance and as well as time in terms of, for example, years of birth. So distance means you have to be able to understand that 1920 was a long time away, a long time ago than 1940. The reason why sometimes children seem not to be moved by the issue of lateness is because developmentally they may not have understood the concept of time as a way to measure quantity, as a way to measure distance, and as a way to measure length. So if you have 30 minutes to get somewhere, it means you have more time than if you have 20 minutes to get somewhere. But for a child who developmentally is still using manipulatives to count, for example, they cannot conceptualize that 30 minutes, 20 minutes means you have less than 30 minutes. So sometimes when they behave in a manner that is not aligned with what someone who understands the concept of numbers would, if you told an adult that you only have 20 minutes to get somewhere as opposed to 30 minutes, you expect that the adult is able to cooperate and help you to do whatever you need to do faster so that you can get to wherever you're getting faster. But a young child is not supposed to, is not able to understand that. And so sometimes when they drag themselves or they don't seem to do what you would expect them to do, for example, on a school morning, bear in mind the fact that numbers, the time, the concept of lateness means nothing if a child cannot understand the numbers in terms of distance, in terms of length, and in terms of quality. So if a child still cannot conceptualize quantity until they count items, they cannot conceptualize time in terms of how many minutes you have to get to a place. And that's the same way sometimes when trying to explain to children that someone is older than another person and it does not make sense to them. And so sometimes you'd hear young children, for example, maybe around 3 years, asking you, between you and maybe your dad, so between you, their dad, and their grandpa who's older, because the concept of time in terms of distance, in terms of years of birth, so that the person who was born in 1920 was born a long time ago, a long time away, more than the person who was born in 1940. That concept does not make sense to them. And so even issues to do with age are things that we conceptualize as we grow, as we mentally develop, and we are able to understand the value in numbers. So bear with your little ones if they do not seem to cooperate when you're sometimes overwhelmed on school morning. You need to get to work, you need to drop them to school, you need to drop them to the school bus and so forth. It's often not that they mean to not cooperate or to make your morning difficult. It's that sometimes it's really difficult to pretend to understand something that we cannot understand. And the concept of numbers is something that children acquire as they grow older. So if they are, for example, 3 years, they're still using items to count numbers. So they're still using manipulatives to count between the 4 items and the 2 items, which one is more. They have to count the 2 and count the 4 and see which is more. They also have to see. So they are still very visually reliant on the concept of numbers and what what numbers represent. So this is a developmental milestone that will come much later. And so please bear in mind that it is a developmental milestone that they are yet to acquire. And so sometimes just being able to plan yourself and do things and give more time to be able to do things, just so that you know, you're not hurrying them and you're not having to fight because time is running out, may be something that they translate as loving, because until they conceptualize what time means and what lateness means, which you cannot conceptualize lateness if you don't understand time as a concept of quantity and distance and length. Really, it's like trying to speak to someone who doesn't understand your language and trying to have a conversation with them. It's just not something that someone can pretend to understand. So I hope this helps you shed some light into where the young children are coming from when it comes to the issue of time and lateness. And I hope that you can be able to accommodate them a little bit more. And I hope that this has been informative. So thank you for tuning in, and see you on the next one.